The current chairman asked me to talk about how Essex is seen from abroad. Until recently, I would say not many people knew about Essex from abroad, about Essex history. They knew it from the history department's point of view because I was very active in inviting primarily French historians, but the most distinguished French historians, I think it's fair to say, Ladurie, Furet, Emma, Revel, big names, who came to give seminars, and in fact, one at least, Emma, was here for some months. Then occasionally others from other countries, certainly at least one Italian student came to do his doctoral work for a year here and is now a professor in Italy. And certainly there's at least one German historian in the early stages, Reinhard Kühnel, who came to give a seminar here. So it's from the very outset, which means from the mid-70s, from when I was here at any rate, I was concerned, certainly, that we should in fact be as open as possible and make efforts to widen the range of historians. And I think this was in keeping with the actual nature of the department in its early days, which has been comparative in one very real sense, and that is that if one looked around the country in the 70s or indeed the 80s, and I suspect to the present day still to a lesser degree, I hope, most of the historians in any history departments work on British history in one form or another, or at least half of them. Nowadays, perhaps it's no longer true. It certainly was true in the 1970s and 80s still. We took some time, considerable number of years, before we made our first appointment, and a very successful appointment, of an English historian who is present here today, and a very distinguished one. But we are, I think, we were certainly, and I suspect we still are, a very unusual history department in the terms of the research interests of the teaching members of the department, which spread partly because of the existence of the three areas, which made it almost obligatory, well, it made it in practice obligatory in the very early years that there should be one or two, ideally, historians in the three areas, North America, or rather, United States, Latin America, and Russia, Soviet Union, which conditioned us, and it also meant, it's one of the reasons why it took us quite a while to appoint anybody who was a specialist in English history, social history. So I think that is the background which is worth bearing in mind. It also had its constraints. The very fact that there were two historians for each area meant it limited the number of posts because it was difficult to get new posts, even in the happy days when one could get any posts. There was the constraint of the Enlightenment, which surprised me very much when I came. And I'll give, not that the Enlightenment should be a common course to all first-year students in the school, in the faculty. This seemed to me admirable, which we all contributed towards. But it meant, for example, that when in the very earliest days we were discussing how we would shape a BA in history, I certainly had thought in terms that in some ways we're better to go chronologically backwards and start with contemporary history and then back to the 18th, 19th century and back further then to early modern history. But it was impossible to do this since, in fact, the Enlightenment was in the first year. And you couldn't, didn't make sense in that way, to do it that way. It would just become very confusing for the students. So we abandoned that. I put this quite simply just to suggest, very simply, that we were a late arrival here. One always, in fact, is conditioned by what already exists. But in a university which was already very, had made its reputation, not just at a national level, but to an extent at an international level in the social sciences. So the combination of the Enlightenment on the one hand, which conditioned us and held us there, but on the other hand then, the existence of what was already a university which in the humanities and social sciences had strong links or strong interests in research terms, and hence strong links with, at human level, with experts in the subject in other countries, made the department itself already very distinctive from other departments in Britain, as against not distinctive in terms of what was the Essex pattern, I think, from very early on. And I think this has been very much to the benefit of the department and explains, in a way, what comparative history is about, even if it's not methodologically about it in this way. It meant that we came from our own research experiences in a different way, and this went on and continued in this way. I think that Essex history became known at a small level, but by very distinguished historians because they'd come here. I think that Essex history at a much later stage nowadays, to an extent, is known. I think it's not. I think it's very difficult for the equivalent of history departments elsewhere necessarily to know about what happens in other countries, at the undergraduate level above all, obviously, but also at the academic level, except on a personal relationship, and now slightly more than a personal relationship, now also in terms of research projects which can be and get funding from more than one source. So I think it's not surprising it should be this way. I think that certainly in the case of our department, I speak of our department, because I spent some of my happiest years in this department and in most constructive years, I think, in this department, and learnt enormously through my colleagues in this department. But I think in these terms, our department has become known in terms of rating, so it's become known for the wrong reason. Rating has now become an international practice across the countries in the way that the least positive practices are introduced, like free market at the economic level, but also very much rating in terms of something to be imported. And because rating has become something pushed by the European Science Foundation very heavily, and in fact very improperly and inaccurately, in my opinion, this actually means that Essex also became known because, as in different universities, you began to think of ratings, so this came through, but at a marginal level. I don't think it's worthwhile really arguing any more than that. Whereas I think it is much more important, I think 2 points, and then I'll stop. One is that it took us, because we were a late department here, it took us many years to emancipate ourselves at the graduate level. It took us a long time to develop at the undergraduate level, to have some feel confident about this, and also then among ourselves as a research group we're discussing at the theoretical level about problems in history, about the nature of history, and some of these from really from the later 70s. It was difficult to hold it because of the teaching burden, because of the implications of finding the time when we could meet as a group together. We were very dependent on the sociology department at the graduate level, and ran, when we finally started at the graduate level, with the historians, very distinguished historians, Paul Thompson and Leonard Davidoff, of running together. And we only came in late to start ourselves up as at the master's level. I don't know I can't remember the date, but I think it's fairly late. And I certainly remember actually being responsible for making it very clear to my friends, Paul Thompson and Leonard Davidoff, that we were going then to set up our own masters quite independently, and also go on to obviously then as doctorate as well. Not thinking in terms of how history would develop at the institutional level in the country and in terms of funding. In fact, it happened to be the right moment for it, and we developed very rapidly in this way, and it gave us a new dimension. And I think it was very important to recognize that the fact that we had our master's degree, our MA, is something that's very important. We had had occasional doctoral students before, and in fact the very first one is present here today, whom I supervised, and that was a very happy experience. But to make it more organized and also to give us a different depth, it needed to have the graduate level as well, and the department came to this. I think it must be somewhere around the mid-80s, late 80s is my impression, but I can't remember this, but it will be easy to find that one out. So I'd like to stress that in particular. And the only other point I think I'd like to just mention more than anything else is that we've always had two. One is, it's already been said. I think the department, the staff in the department, most of the staff, not obligatorily, has always had an unusually strong sense of discussion at the theoretical level of what we thought history was about, whatever it might be. It wasn't comparative, but what we understood by, say, social history or cultural history. This, in its turn, I think has fed through to the teaching and has been important in that respect, even if we didn't maintain it didn't maintain discussions which are always at a theoretical level necessarily, nor indeed is it to be said that the theoretical level was ideal. And I think this is partly the existence, quite simply, of a strong presence of political science and sociology and economics, but above all, political science and sociology. And the very last thing I wanted to say was certainly to confirm what my friends have already said, which is we were very concerned from the outset about students and about student satisfaction. And I'm delighted to hear that student satisfaction, I know certainly in the last research assessment exercise, this did count finally, actually in real terms. We've always had, because we're a small department, perhaps because it was a small department, particularly easy relationship with students, and that this has proved to be of great value. But the other aspect to this is that it's also because our historians, in good part, the majority of them, have not been historians of England in a faculty which was not particularly oriented towards Great Britain. Hence, they've published also in foreign journals. And insofar as Essex has a reputation, its reputation has also been because so many of the academics, of the teachers in the department, have in fact been working, not just working, but publishing in either foreign languages, sometimes in foreign languages in other countries, but equally, and most probably more, as historians of other countries in English language journals. And the combination of this, I think, has been the most effective instrument to make the department known internationally. And I think I don't need to say any more than that at this stage, certainly.